Welcome to today's deep dive. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are standing inside a high-end jewelry store.
Okay, I can picture that.
Right, so if you look around, the logic of that room is immediately obvious. You know exactly why the flawless, perfectly cut diamond is locked inside a brightly lit, velvet-lined glass case.
Yeah, with a heavy security.
Exactly. While the semi-precious quartz, or, I don't know, a simple piece of agate, is just sitting out on a regular counter,
Right.
we accept that system because it's structured, it's binary, and we assign value based on visible, quantifiable traits, like hardness and clarity.
It's a very comfortable way to view the world, really, because it is entirely measurable. We naturally categorize the physical world just to make sense of it.
But the moment you step out of that jewelry store and into the realm of human potential or spirituality and philosophy, that rigid grading system is supposed to just get thrown out the window.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, modern society generally teaches us that everyone is fundamentally equal, that beneath the surface, we are all made of the exact same core stuff with the exact same potential.
Yes, that is the baseline assumption for most of us.
But what if someone took that uncompromising, brutal grading system of gemstones and applied it directly to human souls?
Wow. Well, it completely upends our modern egalitarian sensibilities, doesn't it?
It really does.
Exploring a framework like that is the absolute definition of stepping into philosophical muddy waters,
Mm.
because it forces you to confront underlying assumptions about human value that you probably didn't even realize you were carrying around.
That is exactly the terrain we are navigating today. We are unpacking a highly specific, very provocative text titled The Preface to Cultivating Immortality.
It's a fascinating document.
Yeah, it was written by an author named Xu Feng, and the origin itself is incredibly striking. It was penned in Harare, Zimbabwe, back in August of 2005.
Which is such a fascinating context for a philosophical treatise. But, before we dive into the deep end of these concepts, it is crucial to lay down some ground rules for our listener.
Right, definitely need to do that.
The text we are examining today outlines the spiritual philosophy of a specific group known as the Life Zen Monastery. And in unpacking this material, we are not endorsing these views,
No, not at all.
nor are we taking sides on the political, philosophical, or spiritual claims made by the author. Our role today is strictly to act as impartial guides.
Just laying out the facts.
Exactly. We are here to dismantle the internal logic of this text and understand what it attempts to tell us about the human desire to transcend the ordinary.
I'm really glad we established that, because the author's first major argument is going to immediately alienate a lot of modern readers.
Oh, without a doubt.
Right out of the gate, he states that humans are not equal. And he isn't talking about cultural or economic disparities either.
No, he goes much deeper than that.
Yeah, he is claiming that humans are fundamentally and spiritually unequal at their core. And he uses that exact jewelry store metaphor to categorize us.
He is incredibly meticulous in his taxonomy. He lays out this strict hierarchy that treats human souls like geological formations.
Okay, let's unpack this, because he says diamonds are the absolute ultimate peak of humanity. Below that, you have rubies and sapphires acting as the high-grade humans.
Right.
Then tourmaline and crystal are your mid-grade, pearls and jade are lower, and finally, granite and regular old stones make up the absolute bottom of the human spiritual barrel.
And the categorization doesn't stop at rocks either. He applies this same rigid logic to industrial materials. Specifically, he uses different types of oil to illustrate his point about inherent utility.
Oh, the oil analogy really drives the mechanics of his argument home.
It does.
He points out that you simply cannot put kerosene into an airplane engine. You can't use industrial lubricating oil to cook your dinner.
Right. It would be a disaster.
Exactly. You can't substitute safflower oil with hydraulic oil or swap out pine resin for tung oil. Every single material has a specific baseline property that dictates what it can and cannot do.
And he translates those baseline properties directly to human beings. He categorizes human levels based on a few specific metrics:
Which are?
their spirituality, their upbringing, their wisdom, and what he calls their antimatter structure, which he also refers to as a spiritual root.
Okay, wait, we should pause right there. Because antimatter structure sounds like we've suddenly leaped into a particle physics lecture.
It does sound like that, yeah.
To a layperson, antimatter is the stuff that powers science fiction spaceships. What does that actually mean in the context of a human soul?
Well, in this specific framework, he isn't talking about the literal antimatter created in a laboratory accelerator.
Okay.
He uses the term antimatter structure to describe the invisible, energetic blueprint of a person. Think of it as the underlying spiritual architecture that dictates a person's physical, mental, and spiritual capacities.
Before they're even born.
Exactly, before they even enter the world. And based on that structural math, he concludes there are 5 distinct types of people in the world.
And those are?
The muddled, the vulgar, the ordinary, the sage, and finally, the immortal.
It's like saying you wouldn't use a smartphone to hammer a nail into a piece of wood. We all have different builds for different purposes. It's not just about what a tool is used for, it's about the operating limits of the hardware itself.
That's a great way to put it.
And we all have different internal hardware. To prove this, the text uses some vivid, honestly slightly exaggerated historical and cultural examples.
The examples are definitely designed to highlight how absurd it is, in his view, to pretend everyone is built exactly the same way.
Yeah, like he brings up Guan Shang, the legendary ancient general. The story goes that Guan could literally sit there laughing, drinking, and chatting while a surgeon scraped poison directly off his exposed arm bone.
Which is just wild to even imagine.
Completely wild. Meanwhile, the author points out, an ordinary person will wince, cry, and hyperventilate over a tiny needle prick at a routine doctor's appointment.
Right, the contrast is stark.
And he even throws in a cultural joke, saying that if you see a solo female traveler confidently trekking around, she must be American, but if you see a woman crying on the ground, she must be Chinese.
Yeah, he admits these are generalizations.
He does, but he uses them to hammer home the point that observing all these wildly different pain tolerances, behaviors, and capacities, and then concluding that we are all exactly the same, is basically a form of collective delusion.
The text even asks a pretty pointed question. If every single person is exactly the same, how do we recognize that Jesus is divine, or that Siddhartha Gautama attained the state of Buddha?
Huh. It sounds like he's saying that pretending we are all equal is actually a form of spiritual denial.
That is exactly what he's saying.
Like, if you walk around convinced you are already a diamond, you'll never put yourself through the intense pressure cooker work required to stop being a lump of coal.
What's fascinating here is that you've hit on the exact reason why the author insists on this hierarchy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. To a modern ear, it sounds elitist, but within the internal logic of the preface to Cultivating Immortality, acknowledging that humans are fundamentally unequal, is the absolute prerequisite for any kind of spiritual progress.
So the hierarchy is essentially a diagnostic tool.
Exactly. If you deny these differences, the text argues you are doomed to be aimless. You become entirely blind to your own specific spiritual limitations.
You don't know what you need to fix.
Right. The author warns that those who refuse to see these distinct grades of humanity are essentially just meat eyes and mortal bodies. They will spend their entire lives without a clear direction, just muddling through a mediocre existence.
Wow.
So recognizing that you are currently a piece of granite is the only way to establish the trajectory needed to eventually transform.
Okay, so if acknowledging you are a piece of granite is step one, what happens when someone successfully pressure cooks themselves?
They move up the ladder.
Right, but what does the absolute top of the ladder look like in this framework? Because the text doesn't just stop at the 5 levels of mortal humans, it moves straight into a highly detailed taxonomy of immortals.
It does. Just as there are 5 grades of humans, there are 5 distinct levels of immortals.
Okay, walk me through them.
The text categorizes them as human immortals, ghost immortals, land immortals, divine immortals, and ultimately, at the very peak of existence, the celestial immortals, or Tianxian.
And reaching that celestial immortal level is treated as the ultimate cosmic achievement. The author explicitly states that becoming a Tianxian is actually harder than becoming a Buddha.
It's the pinnacle.
And he gets incredibly specific about where these beings exist, claiming their base of operations is the islands of the blessed within the blissful world.
He even names a specific entity to anchor this claim.
Right, a figure named Yu, who supposedly resides on Shufeng Island. And this is where the text makes some massive reality-bending claims.
It really escalates here.
It says that you can turn completely invisible in an instant. It claims that with a single thought or just a simple hand gesture, This celestial immortal can create infinite physical phenomena out of thin air.
Yeah, materializing things from nothing.
The author compares this to the biblical concept of Jesus saying a mustard seed of faith can literally move a mountain.
It is a profound escalation from the earlier chapters.
Okay, I need to hit the brakes here on behalf of anyone listening who is firmly grounded in empirical reality.
That's fair.
We just went from, hey, people have different pain tolerances and personality types, to there is a magical being on an island who can turn invisible and conjure matter.
It's a jump.
How does the author possibly justify that leap? It feels like we skipped several crucial steps in the logic.
It absolutely feels like a leap. But the author attempts to bridge that gap by introducing the mechanism of abnormal or reverse thinking.
Reverse thinking.
Yes. The text argues that the reason invisibility or conjuring matter seems impossible to us is because we are trapped in conventional, logical thought patterns.
But how does abnormal thinking solve the problem of physical limitations? Like, how does thinking differently let you defy physics?
Well, he uses a stark analogy to explain the mechanics of perspective here. He asks us to consider a poor, ordinary person who is so overwhelmingly distraught over a $1,000 tuition bill for their child that they actually take their own life.
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
It is. But to that person, the $1,000 is an insurmountable, lethal mountain. But then he contrasts that with someone operating on a different level who might treat that exact same $1,000 like it's literal waste paper.
Okay, I follow the analogy. A psychological shift changes how you interact with a problem, but a psychological shift about money doesn't explain physically turning invisible.
Right.
How does he bridge the gap from a change in perspective to an actual change in physics?
He bridges it by critiquing the very foundation of how we understand reality, starting with our education systems.
Really?
Yeah.
Education?
Yeah. The text contains a fierce critique of lifelong scholars. It notes that people who spend their entire lives studying conventionally often just end up as pedantic, stubborn bookworms. They learn the rules of the physical world so thoroughly that they become entirely trapped by them. A scholar might be able to teach a classroom about physics, but they could never lead an army of 1,000,000 soldiers or claim a mountain as a king because their mind is bound by conventional limitations.
And he contrasts those pedantic bookworms with Huineng, the famous sixth patriarch of Zen Buddhism.
Exactly.
Huineng was completely illiterate. He couldn't read or write a single word, yet he bypassed all conventional education to master the most profound, complex Buddhist philosophy imaginable.
You didn't need the conventional rules.
Right. So the author is suggesting that conventional rules do not apply equally to everyone. And in fact, conventional logic is a barrier. If you try to understand a celestial immortal turning invisible using the rigid logic of a university physics professor, you will fail.
Because you are using the wrong operating system to analyze the data. Precisely. To access higher reality, you have to abandon the conventional logic that insists invisibility is impossible.
Okay, so if conventional logic keeps you trapped as a piece of granite, what is the actual tool required to break out? What is the specific mechanism a person uses to perceive this higher reality and cultivate immortality?
That is where the text introduces the vital concept of Lingju, which translates to spiritual perception.
Spiritual perception. The author makes it very clear that we rely far too much on our standard five senses, right? Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch.
We lean on them entirely.
Yeah, and he argues that without the specific sixth sense, without Lingju, the entire concept of cultivating immortality just looks like a ridiculous, childish daydream.
Because you are quite literally lacking the sensory organ required to perceive the data.
You just can't see it.
Right. The text claims that people without spiritual perception only acknowledge objective material reality. They demand standard scientific proof for everything. And because of that sensory limitation, they are trapped in a three-dimensional box, completely unable to imagine the vastly more massive universes operating just outside their perception.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Think of Lingju, like upgrading your soul's operating system from a basic FM radio to a highly advanced quantum computer.
Oh, I like that.
A basic radio just passively receives whatever terrestrial station is broadcasting. But a quantum computer, according to this text's logic, actually helps render higher dimensions into existence just by tuning into them.
And the claims about what a person can do once they activate this spiritual perception are staggering. The text states that with Lingju, one can travel faster than the speed of light, navigating through actual space and time tunnels.
This is where the framework gets incredibly fascinating,
Yeah.
because to justify these supernatural claims, the author doesn't just rely on ancient mysticism or poetic metaphors, he actually invokes modern science.
Yes, he does.
He brings in quantum mechanics.
Specifically, the observer effect.
Yeah, he points out that quantum physics has demonstrated that the movement and state of subatomic particles, the literal building blocks of reality, are directly connected to the consciousness and the position of the observer.
Right, a particle exists as a wave of probability until it is observed.
Exactly, at which point it collapses into a fixed reality.
He also heavily leans on the famous Japanese water crystal experiments conducted by Masaru Emoto.
Oh, I love that he includes this. For those who aren't familiar, the premise of those experiments was that if you expose a glass of water to positive intentions or loving words, the physical structure of the water actually freezes into beautiful, symmetrical geometric patterns.
It's visually stunning.
It is. But if you expose it to anger or hatred, the crystalline structure becomes fragmented, chaotic, and just ugly.
And the author uses those experiments to argue that science is already proving what ancient mystics knew all along, that human consciousness physically alters the material world at a structural level.
Which is huge.
It is. If your consciousness can rearrange the molecular structure of water, and your body is mostly water, then unlocking a higher level of consciousness, that abnormal thinking we discussed, literally rearranges your physical limits.
It provides the how to the magic. Like, if you understand that your consciousness actively shapes reality, you are no longer bound by the physical limits of time, space, or manual labor.
You transcend them.
The text claims that mastering these specific quantum secrets allows a single person to accomplish in 1 minute what 10,000 ordinary people couldn't achieve in an entire year. You aren't doing the physical work anymore. You are manipulating the source code of the universe.
And the author anticipates the skepticism of his readers here. He offers a very compelling rhetorical defense for the existence of things we cannot see or measure.
It's a brilliant counter-argument, honestly. He says, look around you. Just because our naked human eyes cannot see ultraviolet rays or infrared heat or cathode rays or even the radio waves bouncing all around us right now.
Does that mean we deny they exist?
Of course not. We built tools to detect them.
He is using the invisible realities of the electromagnetic spectrum to dismantle strict materialism.
Exactly. Just because I can't physically see the Wi-Fi signal in my house doesn't mean I can't use it to stream a movie.
Right.
He's arguing that spiritual perception, Lingju, is just the internal biological antenna required to pick up the higher frequencies of the universe that our meat eyes are blind to.
And when you synthesize the quantum mechanics, the water crystals, and the electromagnetic spectrum, the author builds up to one incredibly grand unifying claim.
What is it?
He states, whatever the human brain can imagine essentially already exists.
Wait, really? Let me just repeat that, because the implications are massive. Whatever the human brain can imagine essentially already exists.
Yes. He is arguing that the concepts we write off as pure fantasy or science fiction are not just make-believe inventions of a creative mind. Within this framework, science fiction is viewed as a literal description of actual realities. They might exist in other physical dimensions, or perhaps in future timelines. The author believes some of these fantasies will materialize as our future reality, while others are currently playing out right now in alternate spatial dimensions.
So when a writer sits down and drafts a wild sci-fi novel about faster-than-light space tunnels or invisible beings, they aren't inventing those concepts from scratch.
No, they aren't.
They are unknowingly using their Lingju to perceive a reality that already exists elsewhere and just translating it onto the page.
It is a complete fusion of physics and metaphysics. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the core secret of life, according to this text, is that your style of thinking dictates your physical form of existence.
Mind over matter to the extreme.
Exactly. If you think like a piece of granite-heavy, immovable, strictly logical, you are bound to the earth. But if you cultivate the boundless reality-bending imagination of an immortal, your very life structure undergoes a qualitative leap.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. What is the author actually trying to get his followers to achieve? What is the practical purpose of laying out this massive architecture of gemstones, hydraulic oils, celestial immortals, and quantum physics?
The text is very explicit about its goals.
Yeah.
It is designed to be a definitive guide to the true meaning of life and death.
That's ambitious.
It is. The author wants to show people exactly what happens after the physical body dies, and more importantly, how our specific words, actions, and thoughts right now in this three-dimensional space actively dictate the exact nature of our future existence in the next dimension.
There is also a strong defensive element to the text as well, isn't there?
Very much so. It's clear the Life Zen monastery faced criticism. The author wrote this preface to prove that the group is not spreading heresy or attempting to confuse the public.
He's justifying their existence.
Right. He wants to firmly establish that their teachings are a crystallization of the highest human wisdom, a true treasure house of knowledge that harmonizes ancient spiritual truths with modern scientific discovery.
He wraps up the preface with a deeply urgent, almost pleading call to action. He says to the reader, if you actually want to become an immortal, you need to awaken your spiritual perception immediately.
Time is of the essence for him.
Yeah, he begs people to stop just muddling through their days, to stop wasting precious energy on trivial secular society. He views every single minute and second as incredibly precious fuel for this transformation.
It is a profound demand to stop accepting your status as a piece of granite and to start enduring the pressure required to become a diamond.
And that is exactly why we wanted to unpack this specific text for you today. Whether or not you believe in celestial immortals living on Zufeng Island, or whether you buy into the spiritual applications of the quantum observer effect, this document from 2005 is just a breathtaking study in human thought.
It really is.
It demonstrates how we construct these elaborate grand frameworks of ultimate potential. It shows how we borrow the poetic language of ancient myth and combine it with the bleeding edge of modern science just to map out the absolute boundaries of our own consciousness.
It challenges us to interrogate our own limitations. We walk through life assuming that our current way of processing the world is the only valid way.
Right.
But frameworks like the one presented by the Life Zen Monastery force us to ask a terrifying and thrilling question. What if our prized conventional logic is actually just a very small, very comfortable box we've trapped ourselves inside?
It completely shifts how you view your own potential. And, before we close out this deep dive, I know you had a final thought based on the text's logic that is guaranteed to keep people awake tonight.
I do, yeah. It's a concept I would love for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. It stems from the author's most provocative premise.
Let's hear it.
If it is true that everything the human mind can imagine already exists in some alternate time or dimensional space,
Yeah.
then the simple act of imagining isn't just daydreaming. It is actually a profound form of interdimensional observation.
Poet.
So the next time you are sitting at your desk or staring out the window on your commute, think about that. What entire living universe are you actively observing right now simply by letting your mind wander?
That is a brilliant thought to leave on. Next time you catch yourself daydreaming, remember the mechanics of Lingzhu. You might not just be zoning out, you might be tuning in. You might finally be looking past the measurable traits of the jewelry case and catching a glimpse of the diamond.